Good evening. I have the honor of welcoming you here tonight to this wonderful special reading. Danielle will introduce the poet after I just welcome you. But my name is Carol Mankitti, and my husband was Ifeanyi Mankitti, who passed away a little over 3 years ago. But he bought the store 15 years ago. And so I and my 4 children, we are the owners of the store. And we feel very privileged. So I know we all know that this was a place that he loved very, very much. And that he felt it was a sacred place because he had a lot of faith that poetry would bring the world together in some very special way. So thank you for being here. And I also want to thank James, because James is the one who puts together these readings every single week. And he's our manager, and we're so privileged to have him. And we have some people on Zoom here. That's the Zoom camera. So thank you so much.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
And good evening to the folks joining us via Zoom. I am very, very happy to introduce Major Jackson, a veritable force on the literary landscape and a widely celebrated poet. This goes down a little bit. One whose most recent book of poems, The Absurd Man, presents us, I feel, with a thinker and writer as beautifully vulnerable as he is voracious. Here we have a poet for whom it seems the whole world, the whole big world, is up for grabs and examination. The histories and myths, the countries, the neighborhoods, the stories within the stories, and the selves within the self. I find the poems of The Absurd Man capacious and rangy, and really look forward to hearing them from the poet himself. And also, I understand you're going to be reading from your prose too, so looking forward to that. Major Jackson is the author of 5 books of poetry, including the aforementioned The Absurd Man, published in 2020, Roll Deep, published in 2015, and Leaving Saturn, published in 2002, which won the Cave Canem Poetry Prize for a first book of poems. He's edited the volumes The Best American Poetry of 2019, Renga for Obama, and the Library of America's Countee Cullen collected poems. He's also the author of A Beat Beyond, the selected prose of Major Jackson, edited by Amor Kohli. He has many, 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 many awards to his name, including fellowships from the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown, the Guggenheim Foundation, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard University, just down the street. Major Jackson has been awarded a Pushcart Prize, a Whiting Writers Award, and has been honored by the Pew Fellowship in the Arts and the Witter Bynner Foundation in conjunction with the Library of Congress. He has published poems widely and essays as well in American Poetry Review, The New Yorker, Orion Magazine, Paris Review, Ploughshares, Poetry London, and Zyzzva. He serves as the poetry editor of the Harvard Review. And finally, he is the Gertrude Conaway Vanderbilt Chair in the Humanities at Vanderbilt University. Help me welcome Major Jackson.
Good
evening. What an enormous pleasure to be here, to be back here, I should say. I'm really delighted to see my friend Danielle Legros George, someone who I kind of connect Cambridge and Somerville and Boston with. When I was emerging as a poet, Danielle was one of the first people I met upon arrival in this area, and someone, unbeknownst to her, I don't think, really kind of inspired and modeled a mind, a life of living in the mind and being a writer. That year I met a number of people, but Danielle was clearly one of the smartest people I talked to. And I don't know if you recall, but we also talked about Haitian music. I don't know if you remember that, which was a passion at the time. And there's a lot of beloved friends here and former students, and this is a sacred place. And I know Louisa passed away this year, and I utterly remember Ifeanyi, who had this great laugh and hug that was even made this place even more special. So thank you, James, and thank you, Grolier. It feels like quite the honor, even at this moment in my life, to be part of the history. And thanks, friends and former students, for being here. Well, I'm going to read a bit of A Beat Beyond, and I'm going to read The Absurd Man, and I'm going to read new poems. So A Beat Beyond, I should say, is a collection of, how's the volume, by the way? Good, excellent. It's a small room, so I could step away from the mic and it would sound like amplification, amplifying off all these books. So A Beat Beyond is a collection of blog posts, critical essays, book reviews, notes. I took out the initial manuscript, had interviews included in them, and decided to take those out. And I want to say it was such an honor to be invited to contribute to University of Michigan's Poets on Poetry Series Press, which I can comfortably say accounts for a quarter of my education. As an autodidact, very passionate about language and poetry. You search for answers and clues wherever you can find it. Sometimes your teachers and mentors give you that, but really you're on your own. And it's great to be a voracious reader. University of Michigan felt like a big feast. So it was great to to be invited to pull together something. It'll probably take another 25 years for me to do another book like this. I want to read just a small little section. Actually, it might even be, yeah. It's the first section of the first little essay. Going back into these collection of pieces, let's call them that, I was looking for patterns, and one of the patterns that I realized that I was doing was making this connection between an innate freedom that we practice as writers of poetry, and given the kind of history of, everything from well, you know the history here in America, I don't need to say it. But somehow overlaid on the writing was a sense of writing against that history. and against all the constructions of what it meant to be black and male. Somehow retreating into the space of language and poetry allowed me to create a self that subconsciously, not actively, in some instances, yes, where you find in my work the more polemical moments, the moments of protest, yes, but it's on the page where we can really explore who we are, not just throw up a mirror of what we are, but to explore it. And the malleables, language is so malleable once you get inside of it. There's a great possibility of writing your future self. And so this comes up quite a bit in my prose, unbeknownst to me. So I'm going to read just a little section here. And this has to do with just what I said about language being malleable. Once I heard a distinguished poet remark about a poet unfamiliar to him, whom he had just met and heard give a reading from his work for the first time. It happened on a beautiful spring afternoon. With immense wonder, he said, "My God, that man is at the center of language. He is at the center of the song." The elder poet did not make clear what he meant by the song or what it meant to be a poet at the center of language. But those of us sitting in the hotel lounge awaiting the dinner hour instinctively knew. And we also knew that this was the highest praise one poet could grant another. We understood that to enter language was the equivalent of Elizabeth Catlett entering wood-carved sculptures, or Thelonious Monk entering silence at the piano and in life, a kind of mastery and contribution that is at once a part of and distinct from whatever came beforehand. The poet is the historian and keeper of his art, but he is also the iconoclast who challenges and reshapes its capacity to represent human experience from the inside out. What the elder poet was praising was the younger poet's freedom and ability to slip the constraints of poetry, and I could have written of life. To write from the center of language also gets at, more succinctly, T.S. Eliot's urging to hear the song which is the accumulated noise that is hammered into artful speech. All those poems, epic stories, sermons, myths, and other works of art that construct the comprehensive portrait of humankind. Our aim as writers is to not only hear the past, but to contribute to that song by activating and regenerating language that is reflective of our freedom. All the poems ever written are attempts to add one's own sound to that collective cry of humanity. Langston Hughes reminds readers that Black folk are denied inclusion at the Freedom Banquet, and that we as a country do not fulfill the promise of our ideals of valuing each individual. Hughes states, "I am the darker brother. I too am America." This is what is meant by high lyric. All else is fiddling and gimmickry, a kind of muttering that aspires to pure song but lacks the reach and richness of its intent and contours. As a poet, I want my best poems to push forward into the inner workings of language, to exploit both its suggestive and literal meanings, but also to set ringing language's physical properties, to reach the transcendent condition of an art to which I utterly give myself. In so doing, I employ the full range of possibilities. both conventional and experimental, by which to dramatize my life into song, in what I call the lyric self. Once you do that, you also realize that it's not just one self. There's multiple selves. And the poem might be an exploration and an amplification of those selves. So Borges, who was in this very room, understood that, wrote a wonderful piece, as you know, Borges and I, which became, along with my rereadings of Albert Camus, was the inspiration for this poem. And you'll hear some of the echoes in it. This is called Double Major. The book opens up with Major and I, after Borges and I, but it ends with Double Major. And the conceit is one of the selves speaking about the self that you see before you. I emerge whenever he confuses the lamp for a moon. It is then he thinks of fine bindings in ordered Athenaeums. I own his face, but he washes and spends too little time behind his ears. He sees me in the mirror behind thick clouds of shaving cream, then suddenly believes in ghosts. His other selves are murals in the cave of his mind. They are speechless, yet large. They stare his wishes like summer rain and amplify his terrors like newscasters. What he doesn't know, his dreams are his father's dreams, which are his grandfather's dreams, and so on. They possessed a single wish. He knocks repeatedly on the bolted door to his imagination. Tragically, he believes he can mend his wounds with his poetry. And thus, I am his most loyal critic. He trots me out like a police dog. He calls our thirst for pads and pencils destiny. Our voices come together like two wings of a butterfly. On occasion, he closes his eyes and sees me. I am negative capability. The test to all men are created equal. We are likely to dance at weddings against my will. He pulled out the same moves writing this poem, a smooth shimmy and a hop. This page is a kind of looking glass, making strange whatever stone carvings he installed along the narrow road to his interior. I suffer in silence, wedded to his convictions. He would like to tell you the truth about love, but we are going to bed. To bed. New poems. Hopefully continuing this theme. Okay. This is a poem titled Making Things. And lately you'll hear a phrase in here which is the title of the next book, and it's called Razzle Dazzle. I love that phrase. I love the echo of the sound, razzle dazzle. And I understand it's part of a Broadway tune, Chicago. But lately I've been writing these poems in which I'm trying to honor ancestors. I'm trying to acknowledge and give space in my poems to the people who who've made it possible for me. And in this one, you'll hear about my grandmother, who was, I'm happy I didn't write grandmother poems when I was an undergraduate. making things. Suddenly, I had to skewer all my prayers and slow roast them in the open-aired kitchen of my imagination. I had to shovel fire into my laughter and keep my eyes from blinking. I had to fuss like my grandmother's simmering storms, flour on a wooden island, pans lined with parchment, cast iron skillets, and whisk-flecked gravy. I had to move like a ballet dancer, but without the vanity and self-consciousness of tradition. I had to blur my scars so I could write into time and carry the sensation of walking like a morose and heavy American sporting a yellow ascot over Pont Saint-Michel. I want to be all razzle-dazzle before the dark cloaked one arrives for a last game of chess. My font of feelings is a waterfall, and I live as if no toupees exist on earth, or masks that silence the oppressed, or anything that does not applaud the sycamore's tribute to the red flame, like the heat beneath my grandmother's pots, who never raised a ghost, but a storm. So look at me standing on the porch, laughing at the creek, threatening to become a raging river. Waterfall also appears in this poem. I don't know if I visited a waterfall, but you know how some images start to repeat in your work? This is called Let Me Begin Again. Let me begin again. As a quiet thought in the shape of a shell, slowly examined by a brown child on a beach at dawn, straining to see her future. Let me begin this time knowing the drumming in my dreams is me inheriting the earth, is morning lighting up the rivers. Let me burn my vanities, old scotch, that's not true, old music in the pines, sifters of scotch, a day moon like a signature of night. This time, let me circle the island of my fears only once, then live like a raging waterfall and grow a magnificent mustache. Let me not ever be the bird cage or the serrated blade or the empty season. Dear glacier, dear sea of stars, dear leopards disintegrating at the outer limits of our greed, soon we will encounter you only in motivational tweets. Reader, I should have married you sooner. This time, let me not sleep like the prophet who believes he's seen infinity. Let me run at breakneck speeds towards sceneries of doubt. I have no more dress rehearsals to attend. Look closer. I'm licking my lips. This poem answers this question that I've been casting to myself since a young age: why poetry? And I think maybe even, at least for me, the writing has become almost a defense in a way, giving a portrait texture of your interiority. Recently, someone asked me about how do I deal with the absurdity of being a poet. Read the books. Let me add one more to that. The French Quarter. I lived in New Orleans for 3 years in the Lower Garden District and loved it. This was pre-Katrina, and I've gone back a couple of times since. and it still has a hold on me. Some of it has to do with well, you know, it's one of the great syncretic cultures in America. You don't, at the first time I was there, I didn't think I was in America. The French Quarter, over powdered beignets, over a demi-tasse of chicory near Royale. I came to grips, I am the lonely sort, for I am ever seeking an education, my head sideways, a book winged in my hand, its words like a concert, the fried dough going cold and congealing, the passing tourist drowned out, a sullen look on my face. It is when I most want to make love. Dostoevsky was a way out of my confusion, as was Baraka, whom I gave my reverence freely. Nothing I believed stayed, and thus my melancholy deepened, though banjos and clarinets played the streets through late afternoon rain, black bottoms stopped, eucalyptus and live oaks aging against arpeggio runs. I suffered a great pity, and the gypsies were all too quick to auger behind cardboard boxes, stubborn cats mewed in and out around cafe tables, and pigeons spraying from Gothic balconies on the square. If I were one to make concessions, my life was a streak of quandaries and doggeries with quaint and hospitable inscriptions on doors. Every chapter a tempest or escape hatch at some back table where I read alone in faint light. A thin band of gold hops at the bottom of a beer mug. It is good everyone is having a good time on the world's piazzas. I am stuck in the questions I have made a home. At least if I were a character in a novel, I would be assured change was around the corner. Perhaps even a priest to listen in this crowd careworn like me, who likes driving country roads while thinking gloomy thoughts. Here's another poem to explain my interior, or at least language, which as a young person who had great teachers, wonderful teachers from elementary school forward, but also someone who grew up in the church, and something about cadence language really does activate the ear. It becomes unlike, it's ritualistic, as popularly said, and thus, because it's ritual, there's this border and boundary around other uses of language. Not necessarily bad or comparative, it's just that you start to kind of pay attention to language that has a different inflection. This is, of course, a surrealist poem, or at least a surrealist conceit. But like any great riff, there's something true about it here. It's called Language of the Moon. As a child, I wanted as many letters in my bloodstream as the planet Mercury would allow, and so traveled the city on buses late afternoons and read all the billboards high above the streets and byways on sides of factories and churches, and never heard the sermons of the displaced or blustery talk of founding fathers. I grew up in Philly. And saddened when a route snaked through long tunnels, and then eased when re-emerged out of the murder of light. I could feel my veins thicken like the winnings of a Powerball, and the mystery of women lounging around a gray-bearded man in a silk smoking jacket, drinking a tumbler of cognac, was like the easeful glide of a narcotic dream. My mouth puckered whenever lemon-colored arches appeared 5 stories above the city like golden gates to an unforeseen heaven. As a rule, I never glanced at commuters or curators in lucent ties and tuxedos who clutched brown paper bottles and nodded to a stillness as though murdered in a film. Instead, I glimpsed myself, looking out a window, awed by Cartier timepieces and luxury cars that asked, was I hungry for speed? Or ordered me to let my body drive. I ate advertisements like sea waves eating a coastline, and though my sense of self was as bruised as a moldy peach, I learned to infrared my longings from the inside and to tally my suspicions from a distance. And now, when I read a newspaper, I flutter like a sparrow at a bird feeder. And when language spills out of my skull, like a massive cruise ship docked and towering over a line of ramshackle huts on an island whose blessed poor gaze up as though a locker of dollars fell at their feet. My brain closes and my veins burst, as if pollinating the white face of the moon. You have to know, sometimes when I write, I laugh at certain moments. Like, sir, do you have that experience? Like, it's like, where the heck did that come from? You know, so the laughter is kind of existential and also funny. It must be the supermarket in me. It must be the supermarket in me, all lit from inside, full of wide aisles and thoughtful shelf stocking where you'll find my feelings and memories. That's why on the outside I look so ordered and put together. My inner supermarket contains an old world slaughter, an old world butcher shop with no trace of the slaughter. Shoppers arrive with an unfathomable hunger, which I relieve by offering freshness, quality, and value. Some are penniless and can only fantasize, licking their lips at rows of artisanal cheeses and meats behind glass display cases, the cloth-bound breeze and goat at ropes of cured salami and prosciutto. Still they taste. I offer free samples at stations throughout my supermarket so people will come to know and like me. In the produce department, many test my pears and avocados for ripeness. In the floral area, they sniff. Some walk off with my bouquets. I contain cheerful baggers who will escort you to your car. At times, truthfully, I dislike this about myself, forever accommodating. I've not always had a supermarket in me. It began when the church in me lost its congregation and when I lost my mother's love to cocktails and other stimulants. There is no place for anger in my supermarket. I keep it in the back room with a sign that reads, "No trespassing, employees only." It's a way of being in the world, a self full of checkout lines and refrigerators until someone runs through you, knocking down pyramids of canned goods, or panic shopping, leaving empty aisles. It's fun to have a conceit to carry the poem, right? One thing equals X, and then you just run with X. But everyone knows you're talking about that one thing. People like baseball still? Okay, that's good. This was formerly a poem called The Giants, but I'm too loyal to Phillies, because I grew up in Philadelphia, as I said. Phillies. The season of baseball is upon us. I wrote this in the beginning of the summer. The season of baseball is upon us, which is the season of capture and strikes, the season of calm umpires and needy fans roaring like a boiling broth of hope and rage, of baseball bats like cavemen clubs. One must have a mind of baseball, a languorous patience for a team in a 12-game losing slump, a mind for days of tawny mittens and gloves and endless synthetic baseballs fouled out of bound summer sweat like a third skin of charcoal under eyelids like diamond warriors. In 4th grade, I did not have a taste for the game until my friend Gerald from 2 blocks over appeared on my doorstep with a jersey and an extra glove begging me to play with the Twilights, who otherwise would have to forfeit a 3rd round playoff for lack of 9 players. Placed in left field, where mosquitoes buzzed like deacons in a church around my oversized cap, I didn't catch a fly ball that 8th inning, but the coach witnessed the pop fly I scooped and threw to home, then placed me on the mound the last inning. It is the season of risks and Gatorade, of curves and sliders, of carrying a whole team on your back, except when the ball is in play, when everyone steps inside the possibilities of gallantry, when anyone can be a giant, when a strikeout can muzzle an entire stadium, when a tie game can last into an evening's late innings, exiling one from family and friends in the TV's glow and bubble, at last in their own barrack of screaming and fastballs. On listening. If you could listen to my thumbs, then you'd hear the history of oranges. And if you borrowed your neighbor's corkscrew, you'd hear all her sorrows. And if you rode your tourist bicycle northwest along Rue de Lyon, arriving at Place de la Bastille, you'd hear 3 centuries of curses, the Jacobins testing their aging throats. And perchance your eyes widened by love took in the whole sea that is your wife's mind. You'd brush and shake the sand out of her hair, collect them in your lap, then jar the beige grounds so you can study their infinite light. You need not enact silence or testify with a tongue like a yoke with no fire beneath it. Just let the little peanut of your voice blossom into a hike below a crest of pine tops, a way of listening that calms the blood flowing at the center of your marrow. Poem with borrowed image from Marc Chagall. Most days I am full of spacious meadows, golden fields of yarrow and lupine undulating like a veil of free nihilist. Most days I hold it together, like the hairpins in my mother's head. Then other days it is as though I am floating sideways in a sour aquarium. Most days I have the faith of coffee makers. Most days I sit side saddle and drink alcohol and blow fire. Then other days it is as though I am in a line of ants, disappearing into a half-eaten peach. Some days I am a scholar of tiny differences and visit museums where I am a hostage to the makers, whose indelible dreams arrive like ecstatic breezes, especially on the 4th floor, where I stair-step my way to the gilded halls and peer deep into the still lives of fruit and water pitchers and pheasants, which remind me, of course, of my mortality, except I would have included dishcloths and detergent next to a carcass of a rotisserie chicken. All suffering goes this way. We are poor devils made wise by the heft of our wrecks. Some days I scatter fistfuls of stars out of words. I'm a fan of historians. That's not the title of the poem. I really am a fan of historians. But they can be a little too impressive with their neat summation of what has come before. But I like them. Historians. One just died, actually. Historians. I've come to rely on the dark pilots in their sermons of Before You Were Born, which begin their takeoffs on the price of bread in another age or some fallen empire, leaving the telephone poles to resume their dreams of crucifixions. So high above the volcanoes of human emotions, it is then they lose sight of insects pondering their infinitesimal shadows, like the cocklebur weevil who carries memories of forest floors and trees, such as the sycamore, which did not mind starring in German fairy tales. When their windshields are struck blind by late autumn light and foreheads crease like the wind, and the only way to compass their way out of the maze of question marks is to hand over control to their instruments, disguised as grandmothers knitting in a country rocking chair, they think a violent sorrow is coming. They feel trapped behind cockpit doors, ripping through clouds like scissors. They long for milkshakes and games of Twister. They giggle until they are no longer numb. They curse the pages of history books torn and tossed out into the sea that land on the wet rocks. It's okay, because those were the pages of wily tyrants who like to erase the will of the people like soap bubbles. And maybe this is my last book. I'll see how I feel. Actually, I'll read these two poems. I think if you're a poet, there's several things you have to write about. Okay, take out your pen. The moon. You gotta write about the moon. You have to write about light and its corresponding. And you have to write about the dead. It's like part of your job description. You didn't know it when you first started writing, but it kind of goes back to the dead, which you'll soon join. Hopefully not too soon. But you gotta remember that. The dead are a reservoir of secrets. The dead are a reservoir of secrets which they hoard like limes in invisible caves. The dead are disciplined and close rank like catenaries. Occasionally a night wind pilfers soft words stream from their occult of mysteries. The dead avoid all eye contact, yet the light the dead see is all lantern that taunts and calls them back across the firmament. The dead sing at the foot of myrtle trees and read the classics evenings in dentist chairs. They smell like disinfectant. Like us, they open their hooked mouths to taste first rain, a wide, thick tongue, like a dry countryside. If only we could see them in between lanes of traffic, or cross-armed in our hallways, inhaling our love cries. Envious as our pious hands roam like forlorn clouds. They avoid graveyards, which make them squirm. The dead have an incurable habit of thieving. The dead want a vacation from the job of being dead. So these poems don't have titles, so I just say the first line. Over and over again, I bring the peach to my mouth. Over and over again, I bring the peach to my mouth. The peach of thunder, the peach of bare necessities, the peach of starry consolation, a singular path of desire along my brainstem, the peach of my enemies, whose slights fly over like poison air, dark as an ink blotter, or like honking geese, whose blaring still I welcome. Look at my cheekbones, wet and sticky with the juice of living. What arrives as a riddle to others, cloudy mornings, is merely the conundrum I enter like a raft going downstream over rough waters. I like going in, even against the odds. I swim in pond scum. I go to the bank like a pauper and meditate my future between its alabaster columns. I want no handouts. My pulpy tenacity perfumes the air. The peach, I sink my teeth, solemn as the priest of time, another Lazarus forsaking his tomb. Thank you for
Thank you for the beautiful reading, Major. We have time for a couple of questions if
Thanks,
anyone
Jimmy.
wants to ask Major a question.
or I can sing. Danielle, thank you for saving the audience from that bad rendition.
It's a comment, possibly a question. As I heard you read, and as I was really just letting the poems wash over me, it occurred to me that I think you're a maximalist. And I wonder what you think. I mean, the poems, like, they build, you know, there's this accretion, there's this accumulation, like sediment, like earth and building. And I wonder if you agree with that label or that approach or that, yeah.
Yeah, I thank you for that. Recently I heard someone talk about another poet. And anytime someone talks about another poet, you suddenly get self-reflexive about your own practice. And they use that term, maximalist, and without explaining, but intuitively I knew. Like, I'm not a Robert Creeley or HD or a Kate Ryan.
Right.
There is, and I think it has to, I was thinking about this recently. I have this thing I like to say to my students that I realized I was saying it just to justify my own practice, which is a poem is a series of layered effects. And so the more that I'm doing, the more I feel as though the poem is deepening towards some center. Sometimes, most of the times, I don't know what that center is until I start that layering. And so the accretion is not detritus. I don't want to say that. And there's purpose to it. But the more I can texture the language, the more I can layer metaphor and simile on top of it, the more I can enact a certain kind of meter that emerges from my breathing. The more I can high-five other writers, moments and histories, thinkers. I feel like I'm making it worthwhile for the reader's attention. So the sculpture of language that is there hopefully feels sublime. Hopefully it doesn't feel taxing. Hopefully feels like, you know, there's a glimpse into something that may refract to their own selves. Like you can see, depending on what angle you're looking at it. Yeah. I love that term, the maximalist. Hi.
I've got a simple question. Do you have a publication date for Razzle Dazzle?
Good question. Do I have a publication date for Razzle Dazzle? According to my publishers, September 2023. A year from today. Yeah. I'm excited. Thank you. Hi. Hey.
Hi. Sort of a process question, maybe. How do you return to sort of like the back room of the grocery store when you find yourself getting really caught up in the bagging, attending, all of that? How do you, like, what are some things that you do to kind of return to that place of intimate self or selves in poetry?
Wow. I feel like I need to write a part 2 to the poem to fully answer it, but I will say there was something gratifying to kind of look inward and realize that this is a part of my personality, the person that wants to please as much and be brightly lit like a, and let's just say, supermarkets is very literary, right? There's a lot of works that we can point to where that conceit or metaphor has been used. But the back room where the anger lies, right? I think I said something like that, where you don't have to put on a face. I guess I do take it to the page. I think that's the best place for me. I have a friend who recently admitted that she only screams in her dreams. She only gets angry in her dreams, and that's the result of years of conditioning, particularly from her generation as a woman. It was classes too. It was cultural and classes that you didn't reveal those kinds of emotions, which is why a lot of people drank, and that that you can have an excuse. I'm going to explore that. This is one of those questions I'm going to take with me and contemplate how I give myself permission to inhabit other kinds of emotions and vulnerabilities. That's really what it's about.
Yeah.
It's being vulnerable, I guess. Hi.
Hi. First of all,
Is
it's nice
that
to
you?
see you, Professor. Yes, it is.
Hi, it's good to see you.
When you were reading from The Absurd Man, you mentioned that a lot of the work that you're talking about tonight is an exploration of your own interiority and just the utter complexity of that and all the different layers. But it struck me when you were reading that poem, how when you talked about how his father's dream, his dream is his father's dream and his grandfather's dream, how that was like a very simple way to describe that, and I found that to be in contrast with all the complexity that you were exploring with your interiority. So I'm just curious, if that contrast was intentional, and if so, if you could elaborate a little bit more on why you made that choice.
Yeah, I didn't. I mentioned earlier about giving room for previous generations, and that was one of the areas I was thinking about. And in another poem on disappearing, that debt is named, and in a way that debt is alluded to in this particular poem, and it's freedom. It is ultimately. I have the great privilege of being a teacher and a writer, and a descendant of someone for whom language was denied. So there's that. There is, in that particular phrasing too, giving space for readers to inhabit their own kind of possibilities of what previous generations have pursued as well, which is why I don't come out and say freedom. But I think if you know some of my biography, you can probably figure that out. But the dream in Afro-American culture and history, it's large. Like you can, you don't want to turn your poem into its own eyes on the prize, but you can best believe Afro-American literature has been one great big freedom project. And a number of very smart people, smarter than me, have kind of talked about that. So, and you got to resist it too. Like I love Frederick Douglass. And all those early memoirs, those narratives. But you resist because you don't want your poetry to only be read through that lens, which is why the construction of a self is so liberating inside of a poem, because you can kind of demarcate and not make it so easy for a reader. And I feel like the struggle to enter into the consciousness, and the lyric poem presents that, opens the door to another consciousness. The difficulty of entering into that consciousness for the reader is the work that we have to do away from the page. So it becomes, reading poetry becomes allegorical of the leap that we need to make towards each other. Y'all have been so kind. Thank you so much. It's 8:03, and I'm very grateful for Danielle and Grolier Bookstore and James and you. Thank you.
Thank you for coming, everybody. If you could please move your chairs up against the wall. We have some books for sale. Poets will be signing books. We've got Danielle A. Major's books here. Thank you for coming.
I always love it when I come here and we have to put up our chairs it reminds me of being after a school function.
It reminds me of
Dennis combination.
it reminds me of concert educators.
Yeah.
Honestly.
And some of them here, so they're I love it. Where it's you finish the meeting and it's
Sorry.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Joe. Thanks for coming.
every time I come, so everybody
Thanks for the great welcome, Carol.